My name is Rachel, and the first time I thought I had finally found something real was the night Daniel stayed up with me while I cried over an interview I didn't get, sitting on the edge of my bed with half-eaten pizza between us, telling me that rejection didn't get to define my future, that one closed door didn't mean every door would close, and I remember thinking that no one had ever stayed that calm with me before. Not when I was upset, not when I felt like I was failing, not when I felt small. And in that moment, I believed that maybe love was just someone choosing to stay when things felt heavy instead of walking away. And that belief alone felt like safety, because before Daniel, I had learned how to make myself easy to love, how to agree, instead of ask, how to apologize even when I didn't know what I had done wrong, how to be the girl who didn't need much and didn't expect much and didn't complain when something hurt. And when Daniel came into my life, he came in with confidence and warmth and the kind of attention that makes you feel like you don't have to compete for it. He listened when I talked. He remembered things I said in passing. He looked at me like I was someone worth noticing. And we met through mutual friends at a small gathering where I was standing near a bookshelf pretending to be interested in it so I wouldn't feel awkward. And he came up to me and said he did the same thing at parties, and that small honesty made me feel less alone, and within weeks we were inseparable, studying together, cooking late at night, sharing stories about families and futures we hadn't said out loud to anyone else. And when he said he didn't believe in casual relationships and wanted something meaningful, I felt relief more than excitement. Because meaningful sounded like safety, and safety was something I had wanted longer in romance. And when he kissed me for the first time and said he felt lucky to have met me, I believed him without questioning how quickly luck can turn into habit, and how easily habit can turn into convenience. And at first, everything felt balanced, like we were choosing each other every day. He texted me good morning. He waited for me after work. He remembered how I liked my coffee and how I hated mushrooms and how I always overthought before decisions and how I always overthought before decisions. And when we became physically close, it didn't feel rushed. It felt like trust becoming visible, and I told him clearly that intimacy meant something to me, and he said he wanted to build something with one person. And that word build made me imagine a future that wasn't fragile. And for months, I felt safe in ways I never had before. I stopped checking his tone, stopped rereading messages, stopped preparing myself for disappointment because he gave me no reason to, until the changes began quietly, not with betrayal but with distance. He started being busy more often, started replying slower, started putting his phone face down, and I noticed but didn't question because I didn't want to be the girl who looked for problems. So I told myself stress could explain silence, and trust meant not assuming the worst even when my chest felt tight. And the day everything shifted didn't start with a fight. It started when he asked me to grab his phone and a message appeared from a name I didn't recognize that said last night felt different, and my stomach dropped and my hands went cold, and I told myself there had to be an explanation. Because love always wants an explanation before it accepts the truth. And when I asked him, he laughed too quickly and said it was nothing, and I wanted to believe him because believing him meant I didn't have to imagine my life without him. And over the next weeks, I noticed how he checked his phone when he thought I wasn't watching, and how he stopped telling me about his day, and how his attention felt divided even when we were together. And I kept telling myself relationships need trust while forgetting that trust also needs truth. And one night while he was in the shower and his laptop was open, a chat appeared that didn't include me, and I saw jokes that sounded like ours and plans that didn't include me, and words that should have belonged to one person being shared with someone else. And when he came back, I asked him why, and his answer wasn't, "I'm sorry, but I didn't mean for it to happen," and I realized how much that avoided responsibility. And when I asked if he loved her, he said he didn't know and that he loved me but didn't want to lose options. And that word turned me into something temporary without my consent, and I understood then that we didn't see love the same way, and I left without screaming, and somehow that felt worse. And in the weeks after, I felt hollow, not just because I lost him, but because I lost the version of myself that trusted easily. And the worst part wasn't the betrayal, but the way it made me question my worth instead of his honesty. And slowly, I learned how dangerous that is. How easily betrayal becomes self-blame when love was real on only one side, and months later I began putting my life back together in small ways. Eating without checking my phone, sleeping without waiting for a message, walking without thinking about where he might be, and every step felt like reclaiming something I had handed over too easily. And I told myself that healing was supposed to feel like progress, that one day I would wake up and feel normal again, but what it actually felt like was quiet. Like a room after everyone has left. And I filled my days with work and errands and small routines that made life feel structured enough not to fall apart. And from the outside, it probably looked like I was fine because I went out with friends and laughed at jokes and posted pictures where I looked like myself again. But inside, I measured every interaction by what it might take from me instead of what it might give. And that's how I met Noah. In the most ordinary way. Standing in line at a coffee shop while I was holding a book I wasn't really reading, and he said he had tried to read it once but stopped halfway because it made him feel too seen. And something about that honesty made me smile, because it didn't feel like flirting, it felt like connection, and we started talking about stories and endings and why people like knowing how things turn out. Even when real life never gives you that. And when he asked if I wanted to sit down instead of taking our drinks to go, my first instinct was to say no, because sitting down felt like the beginning of something and I wasn't ready for beginnings. But I said yes anyway, because I didn't want fear to decide everything for me. And for the first time in months, I talked to someone without waiting for a lie to appear in his sentences. And that felt strange, like walking on ground that might still collapse, but choosing to step anyway. And we didn't rush into anything, not because we were being careful on purpose, but because I had forgotten how to move forward without running. And Noah didn't seem to mind the slow pace. He didn't push for closeness or flood me with compliments or promise things he couldn't prove. He just showed up when he said he would and listened when I spoke. And at first that felt boring compared to the intensity I was used to. But slowly I realized that boring might just mean peaceful, and peace was something I had confused with distance before. And one afternoon when he asked me why I flinched every time his phone buzzed, I almost lied and said it was nothing, but something in his face made me answer honestly. And I told him about Daniel, about the message, about the word options, and how it had changed the way I heard every promise after that. And he didn't interrupt or try to fix it. He just said it sounded like it made me feel replaceable. And that was the word I hadn't been able to say. And he said no one should feel like that in something they call love. And still fear followed me into this new space, showing up in small moments when he took too long to reply or canceled a plan because he was tired or mentioned a female friend without thinking. And every time my chest tightened, I hated myself for not being past it yet, for carrying old damage into something new. And I wondered if it was fair to let someone into a heart that still had cracks in it. And that's when coincidence tested me. Because one evening while I was walking home, I saw Daniel across the street, standing with a girl I didn't recognize, and the sight of him didn't hurt the way I expected. It felt more like pressure, like something unfinished had found me again, without asking, and later that night he texted me for the first time in months, saying he had seen me and hoped I was okay, and I stared at the screen because that message carried more weight than it deserved. And I didn't answer right away, because answering meant reopening something I had worked hard to close, and not answering felt like pretending it hadn't mattered. And when I finally replied with something neutral, he asked if we could talk sometime just to explain, and part of me wanted to hear regret in his voice and turn the ending into something that made sense. And another part of me knew understanding him wouldn't undo what he had done. And I didn't tell Noah at first because I was ashamed that it still mattered to me, and that silence felt like a small betrayal of its own. And over the next few days, I felt split between the version of myself that wanted to move forward and the version that wanted to rewrite the past. And when Noah noticed I was distracted and asked what was wrong, I almost said nothing, but then I remembered how much silence had cost me before, and I told him the truth that my ex had reached out, and I expected jealousy or disappointment or distance, but he just nodded and asked if I wanted to see him. And when I said I didn't know, he said, "Then don't decide tonight." And that space felt heavier than any argument, because it made the choice mine instead of a reaction. And when I finally met Daniel again, it wasn't dramatic. Just two people sitting across from each other in a quiet cafe. And he told me he was sorry, that he hadn't known how to choose properly, that he thought keeping options meant Keeping control and losing me had shown him what that cost, and I believed he was sorry, but I also believed his apology came from loss and not from understanding, and when he asked if there was a chance to try again, I felt the old ache rise in me. The desire to be chosen without conditions, but I also saw something new, the way his words still circled around himself and his growth and his regret instead of the damage he had done to me, and for the first time I didn't want to explain my pain to make him better. I just wanted to protect myself from repeating it. So I told him I hoped he learned how to love someone without dividing it, but I couldn't be the person he practiced on, and when I walked away that time it felt different. Not like loss, but like closure. And that night when I saw Noah again, I realized the hardest part of healing isn't leaving someone who hurt you, but trusting someone who hasn't, because it requires believing that the past doesn't get to define the future. And when Noah talked about plans and trips and things we might build, I felt fear rise in me because the word future had once been poisoned by someone who used it without meaning it. And I finally told him the truth that sometimes I wanted to run not because he had done anything wrong, but because the last person who promised me a future taught me how easily words can be replaced by actions. And he said something I didn't expect. He said, "Then let's not talk about forever. Let's talk about tomorrow." And that made sense in a way nothing else had, because I had been trying to protect myself from endings instead of learning how to stay present. And days passed, and I began to notice the difference between someone who wanted me and someone who wanted to keep me as an option. The difference showed up in small things, like how Noah didn't disappear when I needed clarity, how he didn't make me feel guilty for asking questions, how his consistency didn't come with conditions. And slowly I understood that most of my pain with Daniel hadn't come from losing him, but from losing my sense of worth inside that relationship. And now I was getting it back, not because someone loved me better, but because I was choosing differently. And months later, when I ran into Daniel again by accident, the meeting felt small, not because he had changed, but because I had. And when he asked how I was doing, I told him honestly that I was learning how to trust again. And he smiled like he wanted to believe he had been part of that. But I knew the truth was quieter, that his role in my life had ended the moment I stopped trying to prove my value to someone who couldn't see it. And as I walked away, I didn't feel angry or sad. I felt finished. And that feeling was new to me because for the first time, the story didn't need another conversation to make sense. And now when I look back, I don't think of myself as the girl who was cheated on or the girl who was an option. I think of myself as the girl who learned the difference between attention and intention, between closeness and commitment, between being wanted and being chosen. And I know now that betrayal doesn't mean I loved wrong. It means he didn't love carefully, and the day I stopped asking to be chosen and started choosing myself was the day my story finally changed direction. And from that place, love no longer felt like something I had to beg for or fear losing. It felt like something I could trust again. Not because it would never break, but because I would no longer stay where it did.